Our next speaker is our campaign manager, Alex Vince, and he's going to update us on some of his many campaigns. Welcome to you, Alex.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Excellent. Okay, first and foremost, I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time to join us tonight. We had our first post-pandemic public meeting back in February, but winter has roared back to life here in Sydney. So I think we've made a good decision tonight by reverting back to online meetings. It's also good because I know quite a few people are unable to actually make the journey to Sydney to be at those in-person meetings. So doing it online is excellent for that reason. So I'm really glad that you're here with us, and I really do hope that you get as much out of tonight as we do. Before I get started, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation as the true owners and custodians of the land and country from which I join this meeting tonight. I pay my respects to elders past and present, including any First Nations people joining us tonight. Before we go any further, I want to say quickly a few words about why submissions matter. It's often said that there are many forms that our activism can take, and that finding our individual niche is one of the most important parts of learning how we can harness our own unique skill sets. Because all of us have unique, distinctive skills that we can channel into our collective work to permanently improve the lives of all animals. We don't need to necessarily be on the front lines, quote, unquote, to get us closer to our ultimate goal. Because learning what we can, and perhaps more importantly, what we cannot do, is actually an incredibly important part of activist self-care, especially in a movement whose lifeblood is a dogged determination to end some of the most devastating and destructive industries currently existing on Earth. I'll be back in 1 second. I have to let the dog outside, sorry. Okay, I'm back. So a key component of Animal Lib's mission is education. We believe that education breaks down the barriers of misleading information that's so frequently and often used by the food, entertainment, fashion, and companion animal industries. So an important avenue in educating the broader public, and particularly policymakers, is researching and writing submissions. We believe that crafting evidence-based and persuasive papers in support of the principles of animal liberation is a vital part of achieving these goals. And as Herbert Spencer once said, the great aim of education is not knowledge, but action. So I'm here tonight to provide a quick update and a bit of a rundown on some of the work Animal Lib has recently done in relation to public consultation periods. So we regularly get asked to provide responses to inquiries, both at state and federal level, and frequently get invited to provide expert evidence during hearings. So these are 3 of the most recent submissions we've prepared in response to policies, reviews, and inquiries. So I'll run through each of these before letting you know there's an opportunity for you to have your say on a very, very important upcoming public consultation process. So first, we'll go through the draft National Feral Deer Action Plan. Australia is the only inhabited continent that is not home to native species of deer, yet they have a particularly ambiguous identity here in Australia. They're variously classed or classified as a resource by hunters and as a pest by landholders. So when I was preparing and researching and writing this submission, I remembered a deer farm not far from where I grew up as a kid. And I vividly remember taking carrots after school with my mum to poke through the fence for them to eat. And it looked a lot like that. And thinking about it now, it must have been one of the last remaining deer farms in New South Wales at the time, because it doesn't exist anymore. The first known deer farm was constructed in the area that's currently occupied by Paddy's Market in Sydney CBD. Obviously, that farm no longer exists either. In fact, most deer farms have closed their doors. By 2018, only 100 deer farmers remained in Australia. The industry experienced rapid expansion until the 1980s, but due to long-term declining returns, it underwent significant downturn. And that was exacerbated by successive years of drought, which caused the value of farm deer to dramatically decline and led to many, many deer being released or purchased by people who intended to establish wild herds that they could later hunt. So, as is the case with many wild animal management programs, the question of how many deer are actually out there often informs the control techniques that are inflicted on them. So, as we'll soon see, if it can be shown or it can be argued that there are more deer than guns can kill, other control techniques will be proposed. So accurate population estimates are crucial. And though this is true for all species, it's especially and particularly true for deer. Yet accurately estimating the abundance of wild animals is notoriously difficult, and you can imagine why. Some have gone so far as to say that an accurate account of the number of wild deer in Australia can just never be known. And that's complicated by the various contradictory estimates that are currently available. So in the early 2000s, it was estimated that Australia had a population of approximately 200,000 wild deer, and a staggering 85% of those deer were descendants of deer who were released by acclimatization societies. Acclimatization societies were colonial organizations, and they essentially imported familiar animals for colonists to hunt for fun. So deer were one of those species, foxes were another. And to give you an idea of how many deer that is, sorry, I have to let someone in. That's around 85% of the deer on the icons on the screen there. So that amount of deer or their descendants were basically the product of people releasing them so they could hunt them in the future. Today, the Victorian government suggests that deer populations could be anywhere between several 100,000 to 1 million wild animals or more. Now, they're obviously vastly different numbers, but others still have said that deer populations have increased from that original 200,000 estimate to 2 million in 2021. But they don't provide any supporting evidence for this estimate. So the bottom line really is that we don't know how many deer there are in Australia. And this has significant implications for their proposed control. Because whether they are native or introduced, herbivores can impact human interests or activities. Often this comes in the form of some sort of alleged loss. So deer are often considered competitors for grass or land that's used to graze farmed animals. Yet studies have shown that perceptions of that damage is often overestimated or wildly exaggerated. In fact, some of the damage deer are blamed for is actually caused by native Australian animals. So in its 2018 submission to a Senate inquiry into the impact of deer, pigs and goats, an organisation by the name of Research into Deer Genetics and Environment wrote this: there appears to be an attempt to exaggerate the impacts of wild deer above and beyond those of traditional livestock species, when the only difference is the perceived value of each. So in our review of the draft plan, we found a few key points. It's the first of its kind. It joins other national action plans, such as the plan that targets dingoes. Second, it intends to promote the use of thermally assisted lethal control. So that means that hunters will be encouraged to use advanced technology when hunting wild deer. Third, it proposes the development of new poison baits to kill wild deer. Currently, there are no baits registered for the lethal control of deer anywhere in Australia. And though the plan doesn't even provide any information whatsoever on the type of poison that it intends to use, it's assumed, and I would say it's a given that the poison that will be used, the active chemical in those baits, will be 1080 poison. So if you're interested in learning more, my email address will be on the last slide. Just send me an email and we can have a chat. But yeah, if you have any questions whatsoever that we don't get to, that's the way to go. Next is the Biodiversity Conservation Act. And just with an eye on the time, I'm going to speed up just a touch. The Biodiversity Conservation Act commenced in 2017 and it was up for its first 5-year statutory review this year. So we identified this as an opportunity, a critical opportunity for us to have our say. Now, the Act is the main law that intends to identify and protect native threatened species in New South Wales. So we identified that as a challenge, and I'll explain why now. Australia is falling behind. We are a world leader in extinction, with projections suggesting 1 to 2 species will continue to go extinct every 10 years. So Australia is failing. We are not living up to the international commitments we've made to halt or reverse catastrophic biodiversity loss. The Act doesn't respond to climate change. Only 13% of threatened species in New South Wales have climate change identified as a threat. So more must be done. If appropriate policy and management protocols were implemented, studies have shown that many of Australia's most recent extinctions could have been prevented. So these insights informed the recommendations that we made in our submission. First, we identified the objects of the Act as being insufficient to achieve its overall objectives. So the objects section of legislation is basically intended to set out its intent and its purpose. So objects are important elements of any legislation because they're often considered by courts when deciding what the intent of the law is and also in interpreting its intended meanings. So we recommended that the objects of the Act be updated to reflect its intent. We identified Object B, which is to support biodiversity conservation in the context of a changing climate, as being inconsistent with the approach taken for many vulnerable species. Remember here, of course, that only 13% have climate change listed as a threat. Second, we recommended that the objects of the Act must require improvement to the condition of biodiversity. They currently do not. Third, we recommended that authorities must be required to consider and not make decisions that would further increase the impact of key threatening processes. They currently do not. Fourth, we recommended that the requirement to refuse proposals that will have serious or irreversible impacts should extend to major projects. They currently do not. So if you're interested in learning more or in reading our submission, it's not currently online. So if you send me an email, I can send it to you. The address will be on that final slide. Finally, let's talk about the very, very recent duck hunting inquiry in Victoria. And I know a lot of us, perhaps all of us who are here tonight, will probably be well aware or quite aware of the issues here. There are a few key points that I want to quickly run through together. First, duck numbers are declining. The total abundance of water birds decreased by 41% between 2020 and 2021, representing a decline of 54% from 2019. Second, hunting causes suffering. Methods and techniques used for recreational hunting have substantial animal welfare impacts, particularly those that are associated with non-fatal wounding, so the shooting but not the killing of ducks. Third, participation is declining. Figures from the Game Management Authority show that approximately 0.5% of Victorians took part in last year's duck hunting season. Fourth, Victoria is falling behind. Duck hunting is already banned in Western Australia, New South Wales, and Queensland. Fifth, and finally, Victorians oppose hunting. More than 2 in 3, or around about 67% of Victorians, are against recreational duck hunting and agree that it should be banned. So our submission focused on these three important points: environment, animal welfare, and governance. We demonstrated ongoing declines in water bird populations. We provided extensive evidence demonstrating the adverse animal welfare outcomes of hunting, and we highlighted the failure of regulatory agencies in monitoring, compliance, and carrying out or conducting enforcement activities. In fact, we drew on the findings of a report commissioned by the Game Management Authority itself, which concluded that non-compliance is commonplace and widespread among Victorian hunters. The report concluded that the GMA has failed to deliver on its responsibility to enforce hunting laws. So it's essentially a lawless activity. Our submission strongly recommended that the Victorian government urgently ban the practice of recreational duck hunting. So to stay up to date with new opportunities to have your say, we frequently provide templates or guides. So make sure that you follow us on our social media channels. But the next one that is coming up is the phase out of live sheep export by sea. Submissions to this close on the 31st of May. So we have, another 20 days? So 20 days to flood the federal government with the responses to this. I think we can do it. So we'll be providing a template for this as well. So keep your eyes peeled for that. But thank you all again for being here with us. And if you do have any questions that we don't get to, please feel free to email me on that address. Thank you.
Alex, thank you so much. I always learn so much listening to your presentations. And in my very long life, I've read so many submissions, but until reading Alex's submissions, he's placed the bar so high up that, I mean, if you look at just the pages of references, I mean, that he has to absorb before he puts it onto paper, his submissions are the best. They are outstanding. And I'd just like to clarify, Alex, how very important submissions are as well, and how gratifying it is that, once upon a time, animal liberation was seen as a bunch of rat bags, blip, blip, blips, and now the government is coming to us for our considered opinion because they know they can rely on people like you to give them the most accurate and well-informed responses to their queries and questions. And without the government becoming aware of what groups and the society want, nothing will ever change. That's why submissions are important. And just further to what Alex has said, you don't have to have the skills that Alex has to do a submission. You can just write a paragraph if that's what you want to do. There's, just whatever you can say from your heart is more than enough. And Alex, just before I let you go, can you just share with all of us tonight, you told me a couple of days ago, and I remain floored by the hunter accuracy tests?
Yeah, so it's a water bird identification test that hunters have to complete in Victoria. They have to identify correctly 85% of birds in that test. Yeah, but when the Game Management Authority went back and reviewed afterwards licensed hunters and the number of birds that they could accurately identify, it was a fraction of that amount. Something like 15 to 20% were correct. So the remaining 80% were incorrect. And those birds, obviously, as we've seen just the very recent duck hunting season down in Victoria, protected birds continue to be shot.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. Let's hope that with your submission and others, this will be the last year, at least, for Victoria to have a season.